The moment one of those fake officers slammed my face onto the scorching metal of my own truck hood, I knew Karen had finally crossed the line she could never walk back from. The heat from the engine pressed against my cheek like a branding iron, and I could feel tiny grains of dust grinding beneath my skin. Their boots scraped across the gravel behind me, nervously shifting, as if even they weren't convinced they had the authority they were pretending to wield. My wrist stung sharply as cheap steel cuffs snapped shut around them, the edges jagged enough to bite deep. For a second, all I heard was my own breathing, slow, steady, instinctive, because a part of me that I'd hoped to leave behind forever was waking up. "Stay down! Do not resist!" one of them barked, his voice shaking just enough to reveal he wasn't used to giving orders. It wasn't the command of a trained officer. It was a shaky imitation, a voice trying too hard to sound in control. The other man hovered close to my shoulder, his knockoff tactical vest creaking as he shifted his weight. Everything about him screamed costume rather than authority. Mismatched patches, a badge that glinted too brightly, boots that were too new, too clean. But none of that compared to the real shock. Karen Whitfield, standing at the edge of my driveway with her arms crossed, watching like she had personally choreographed every moment. The HOA president who once welcomed me with a smile now stared at me the way a warden watches a prisoner being processed. Her blonde hair was pulled tight, her expression calm, too calm. She wasn't surprised, or horrified, or even hesitant. She looked satisfied, as if seeing me pinned down like this fulfilled some twisted version of justice she believed only she had the power to deliver. "Make sure he understands he's being detained for obstruction," Karen said, her tone icy and rehearsed. The two men tightened their grip on my arms as if her voice alone commanded them. She spoke like someone who had convinced herself she was in charge of something far bigger than an HOA. A queen convinced she ruled more than a neighborhood. My mind raced as I stayed still, letting them think they had control. I felt that old training settle over me like a second skin. The ability to measure distance, angle, weight, tone, threat. The world sharpened. I could hear the faint hum of the engine, the uneven cadence of the officer on my right, the false confidence in Karen's voice. My shock began melting into a cold awareness. These weren't real officers. This wasn't a lawful detainment. This was a performance staged by a woman drunk on authority and two men too foolish to understand the danger they were in. I knew that if I didn't end this on my terms, Karen would escalate it further. She already believed she had won. So slowly, very slowly, I shifted my cuffed hands just enough to reach the inside of my jacket, letting my fingers brush against the cold metal. Of the one thing they never expected me to have, the one thing that would unravel everything Karen had built, and the moment I pulled it out would change the entire course of this neighborhood forever. I didn't know it then, but the day I unloaded the last box into Willow Creek Estates was the day I stepped into the most dangerous neighborhood I'd ever lived in, and I've lived in some bad ones. It's strange how danger rarely announces itself. Sometimes it hides behind a freshly painted welcome sign, manicured lawns, and smiling faces that look harmless until you learn what those smiles are really covering. Back then, Willow Creek felt like the perfect place to start over. A quiet suburban pocket where I could finally breathe after years of federal work that wore me down more than I care to admit. I thought I was moving into peace. I didn't realize I was stepping into a war zone disguised as a community. The sun was warm, the air smelled like cut grass, and the only sounds were distant sprinklers and the soft rumble of my moving truck. As I lifted the final box, I noticed a woman walking toward me. Her posture was perfect, her smile polished, and her steps confident like she owned the place. That was my first introduction to Karen Whitfield, the HOA president. If I had trusted my instincts then, I might have recognized the warning signs written clearly across her expression. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Something behind them flickered, a mix of curiosity and control. "Welcome to Willow Creek, Mark," she said, already using my name before I told her. "I like to know every homeowner personally. Helps keep the community aligned." The way she said aligned felt wrong, like she wasn't talking about unity, but obedience. Still, I pushed the unease aside and thanked her. She stepped closer than necessary and started asking questions that felt more like an interview than a friendly chat. What did I do for work? Why did I choose this neighborhood? Did I live alone? What time did I usually get home? They weren't casual questions. They were probing, mapping, assessing, and something about her tone made it clear she believed she had the right to know everything. Before I could respond fully, I noticed a couple across the street. They were watering their flowers but kept glancing nervously toward us. The moment Karen turned her head in their direction, they quickly put down the hose and hurried inside as if they didn't want to be seen talking to me while she was present. It struck me as odd, but I tried brushing it off. I told myself it was just new neighborhood awkwardness. But the discomfort lingered. As I carried boxes through the front door, I kept replaying Karen's questions in my mind. Why did she care so much? Why did the neighbors seem scared of her? The answers would come later, far more painfully than I ever expected. I hadn't even finished unpacking when I noticed something taped to my door. A single sheet of paper fluttering in the breeze. I pulled it off, expecting a welcome note. It wasn't. It was my first violation notice, and I hadn't even lived there for an hour. The first time Karen stepped into my backyard without permission, something in my chest tightened. The kind of instinct you don't ignore when your past has taught you what real danger looks like. It was early morning, barely past sunrise, and I was sipping coffee on my porch when I heard the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter. Not a phone camera, a real one, sharp and deliberate. I walked around the corner of the house, and there she was, Karen Whitfield, standing on my grass like she owned it, snapping photos at rapid speed. Her expression was focused, almost hungry, as she photographed my gutters, siding, paint, plants, everything she could angle her lens toward. It wasn't inspection, it was surveillance. "What exactly are you doing in my yard?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. No need to start a war on day two, even if everything in me warned that she had already started hers. She didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't even seem embarrassed. Instead, Karen turned the camera toward me and gave a tight smile. "Compliance sweep," she said, as if the phrase explained everything. "Random inspections to ensure our community maintains high standards." "Random inspections don't include trespassing," I replied. She waved the comment away, as if it were nothing more than an annoying fly. "As HOA president, I'm authorized to ensure every property is in line with the bylaws." The confidence in her voice didn't match the legality of her claim. I knew the rules well enough to recognize she was bluffing, stretching her authority far beyond what any HOA president is allowed. Then she pointed toward my shed. "I'll need to take a look inside as well. Residents have been known to store prohibited items." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but her expression wasn't playful. It was expectant, demanding. "The shed is off limits," I said firmly. "You've already crossed a line being back here. You're not inspecting the inside of anything." For the first time, her polished smile cracked. Just slightly. Her eyes narrowed with a flash of irritation, like she wasn't used to anyone telling her no. "Refusing an inspection could lead to fines," she said, her voice sharpening. "Then write up whatever you need to write," I answered. "But you're leaving my yard." She stared at me for a long moment, calculating something. Measuring me, maybe. Testing how far she could push before I pushed back harder. Finally, she stepped away, but not before saying, "This community depends on order, Mark. I expect cooperation." The way she said my name felt like a warning. As she walked out, I noticed a small patch on her sleeve, an emblem I didn't remember seeing at the meeting. HOA Compliance Enforcement Unit. The phrase was laughable, but her confidence in wearing it wasn't. I watched her step through my gate and head toward the street. That's when I saw them. Two men standing across the road in generic dark uniforms. No badges, no names, no official markings. They weren't talking. They weren't moving. They were just watching. Watching me. And in that moment, I knew Karen wasn't operating alone. The violation letter didn't scare me, but the second one did, and the third one felt like a threat. The first notice arrived the morning after Karen's backyard stunt. I found it taped to my door, flapping in the breeze like a warning flag. Failure to comply with HOA standards. It read, citing Article 14, Section D. I didn't think much of it at first. Annoying? Yes, but HOAs love paperwork. I set it aside, assuming it was another one of Karen's overreaches. But the second notice arrived that same evening, this time slipped under my door. The violation number was different, the wording more aggressive. It warned of possible fines. Then the third came the next morning, bold red lettering across the top declaring immediate action required. This one mentioned property liens, forced entry, legal consequences. My patience thinned into something sharper. What bothered me wasn't the content. It was the frequency, the urgency, the escalation. It felt less like an administrative reminder and more like someone pounding on my psychological door. I spread all 3 letters across my kitchen table and compared them side by side. Different fonts, different formatting. Even the signatures looked inconsistent. Something was off. Article 14, Section D, Article 8, Clause 9. These didn't sound like standard HOA language. So I pulled out the official HOA packet I'd been given at signing. I flipped through every page, twice. None of the citations existed. Not one. I could have ignored it, but something in me refused to let Karen rewrite reality unchecked. So I drove to the county records office, a beige building with flickering lights that smelled like old paper and floor polish. The clerk retrieved a dusty binder labeled Willow Creek Estates, Registered Bylaws. I read through all 87 pages while she watched me curiously. Every violation Karen had issued cited a section that wasn't in the official record. Not one matched. Not one was legally recognized. HOAs have to register amendments with us, the clerk said as she tilted her head at my stack of printed notices. None of these are listed here. If they're enforcing unregistered bylaws, that's questionable. Questionable was a polite understatement. It was illegal. As I left the building, 2 older residents from Willow Creek stood near the sidewalk. They recognized me, exchanged a hesitant glance, and one finally whispered, "You're dealing with Karen, aren't you?" I nodded slowly. "She did this to the Sanders family," the woman said, "and to Donnie on Willow Ridge. She scares people. Most don't fight back." Her husband added, "Once she targets you, she doesn't stop." Their voices carried the weight of experience, and a chill crawled down my spine. I suddenly realized this wasn't personal. Karen didn't dislike me. She needed someone to dominate, someone to prove she was untouchable. I drove home with a new awareness. This wasn't mismanagement. It wasn't incompetence. It was calculated intimidation disguised as administrative action. A small legal fact I once learned echoed in my mind. Homeowners have the right to verify the authenticity of any HOA document at the county office. If it isn't filed there, it can't be enforced. That rule had protected many people before me. Back at home, I laid all the notices on my table again. I looked carefully at the signatures this time. Karen's name was there, but the loops of the letters, the slant of the strokes, the spacing, they changed from letter to letter. 3 signatures, 3 different handwriting styles, 3 different forgeries. And that was when I realized Karen wasn't just abusing power, she was fabricating it. When I walked into the meeting room, the first thing I saw was my name written on a whiteboard under the word non-compliant. The letters were thick, angry strokes, as if someone had written them with the same intensity people use when carving warnings into trees. The room fell silent the moment I stepped in, chairs creaking as heads lowered or turned away. Every instinct in me tightened. This wasn't a meeting. It was a setup. Karen stood at the front like she was presiding over a courtroom instead of a community discussion. She wore a tailored blazer and a smile sharpened enough to cut glass. "Ah, Mark," she said brightly, too brightly. "We were just about to get to your violations." She gestured to a stack of papers, my notices, spread across a table for the room to see. Each one was circled in red ink like evidence in a criminal trial. I looked at the board members seated beside her. None made eye contact. Their shoulders were slumped, their hands folded tightly, their expressions stiff with fear. These weren't leaders. They were captives. Karen cleared her throat with authority. As you all know, compliance is vital to maintaining order in Willow Creek. Some residents, she looked directly at me, have become increasingly hostile to our standards. I stepped forward. If hostility means refusing illegal notices, then sure. A few people inhaled sharply. Karen's smile thinned. We do not tolerate disrespect during official meetings, she snapped. We also don't tolerate forged signatures, I said, pulling out the notices I'd brought with me. 3 letters, 3 different signatures. None of them match the official bylaws. And none of the bylaws you cited even exist in county records. A ripple of murmur spread through the room. For a brief second, I saw uncertainty flicker in the eyes of the board members. But Karen moved quickly to extinguish it. These accusations are baseless, she said sharply. The board has full authority to amend bylaws without immediate filing. That's not true, I replied. County law requires— Enough, she barked, pounding her hand on the table. The sound echoed through the room like a gavel. She straightened her jacket and regained her composure. If you continue disrupting proceedings, we will take disciplinary action. It was only then that I noticed movement in the back of the room. 2 men stepped forward, those same men I'd seen watching me from across the street. Same generic uniforms. Same clean boots. Same stiff posture. They flanked Karen like bodyguards. I believe you've already met our compliance enforcement unit, she said proudly. A few residents visibly flinched. Others looked down at their hands. Fear had a presence in that room, thick and suffocating. I forced myself to stay calm. Those aren't real officers, I said quietly. And this isn't a real enforcement. Karen's jaw clenched, but before she could respond, one of her uniformed men moved closer. He leaned in just enough for only me to hear him. You're done here, he whispered. His breath was steady. His tone wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And in that moment, I realized Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was building an army. I knew the sound of boots on grass. I've heard it too many times in too many places, but never behind my own home. The rhythm was unmistakable. Heavy, purposeful steps meant to intimidate more than approach quietly. I set down my coffee and stepped out onto the porch, my instincts already shifting into a sharper state of awareness. Sunlight filtered across my yard, catching on the edges of 2 dark uniforms climbing over my back fence like they belonged there, the same fake officers from the meeting. One dropped down with a grunt, gripping the fence post as if he wasn't used to climbing anything more challenging than a curb. The other hopped down after him, landing awkwardly, straightening himself, and scanning the area with a seriousness he clearly didn't earn. Their boots crushed the soft grass in synchronized steps as they moved deeper into my yard, each footfall echoing louder in my head than it should have. You're trespassing, I called out, keeping my voice steady. Both men turned. The one in front raised a laminated badge that looked like it had been printed at a home office store. We're conducting a probable cause inspection under HOA authority, he said. I almost laughed. There's no such thing as probable cause under HOA authority. He straightened, trying to reclaim confidence. We have reason to believe you're harboring restricted materials on the premises. Restricted materials? I repeated. In my backyard? He nodded as if the absurdity didn't bother him. Behind them, the gate swung open and Karen appeared, stepping inside like she was entering her own property. Hands on hips. Chin lifted. Her voice sharp enough to cut air. Residents have complained about irregular activity around your shed, Mark. We're simply ensuring compliance. This is an illegal search, I said, pulling out my phone and hitting record. You step inside that shed and you're violating actual law. Not just HOA fantasy rules. Karen scoffed. Documentation of inspections is permitted. Not when it involves entering private property without consent, I replied. A homeowner's yard is protected. Even police need a warrant unless there's an immediate threat. Your made-up enforcement unit has neither. The officer hesitated. For a moment, I saw doubt flash across his face. Then Karen spoke again, her voice sharp. Proceed. We don't need his cooperation. The taller officer moved toward the shed. I stepped in front of him. Touch that door, and you'll be explaining your actions to real law enforcement. He paused just long enough for Karen to feel the shift in power. She stepped forward shouting, "You are obstructing an authorized inspection." "No," I said, raising my phone higher, making sure the camera captured her perfectly. "I'm protecting my property from trespassers, and this video will make a great exhibit." The shorter officer muttered something under his breath. The taller one looked at Karen, waiting for direction. For the first time since meeting her, I saw uncertainty break through her polished mask. They backed away, but not out of fear. Out of strategy. As they reached the gate, the tall officer leaned in close, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Next time," he said, "we won't ask." The moment I found their uniforms on an online store, I felt a slow burn of anger I hadn't felt since my federal days. The same cheap tactical vests. The same generic black shirts. The same off-brand boots. Everything those men wore, everything they tried to use to intimidate me, was available to the public for $49 each. No background check, no credentials, no legitimacy whatsoever. Just click, pay, and pretend to be someone you're not. I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight, the glow of my laptop screen lighting the room as I dug deeper. I typed in the badge numbers I'd seen during the backyard confrontation. Nothing. Not one entry in any public registry, law enforcement database, or private security licensing index. The numbers didn't belong to any state, county, or agency. They didn't even follow the formatting conventions of real identification codes. They were fabricated. The more I searched, the more the truth sharpened. These weren't officers. They weren't even licensed security guards. They were props Karen had dressed up in authority to control the neighborhood. Still, I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. I pulled out the stack of paperwork I'd collected. Every notice, every letter, every so-called compliance directive. I started comparing the fonts, seals, signatures, and dates. Buried in the fine print of one document was a reference to a Board Authorization Addendum 4B. Supposedly approving the creation of the Compliance Enforcement Unit. But when I checked the HOA's publicly filed documents, there was no Addendum 4B, no mention of an enforcement unit at all, no vote recorded, no approval signatures. Then I saw it, the signature on the supposed authorization form. Karen Whitfield, except it wasn't the same signature she'd used on my violation letters. The curves were different, the slant reversed, the spacing inconsistent. She hadn't just created a fake enforcement unit. She'd forged the paperwork to make it look official. I took photos of everything and printed duplicates. I needed someone with experience, someone who understood fraud and impersonation as well as I did. That's when I walked across the street to see Tom. Tom Matthews was a retired police officer, the kind of man who carried himself with the quiet seriousness of someone who had seen a lot more than he talked about. When I showed him the documents, his expression hardened. "These badges are fake," he said immediately, tapping the image on my laptop. "No state uses that numbering system. And this patch? It's decorative. I've seen these used for Halloween costumes." I handed him the authorization form. He studied the signature, then nodded slowly. "She forged this. Sloppy job too. She thinks no one will check. She's escalating," I said. "Illegal searches, fake officers, threats." Tom sat back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. "Mark, HOA presidents don't do this. This goes beyond control. This is someone who believes she's above the law. I'm not letting her get away with it." He looked at me carefully then. "Good. Because she's not finished. People like Karen don't back down when they're exposed. They double down." I felt the weight of his words settle over me. The idea that everything I'd been dealing with so far, the trespassing, the forged notices, the intimidation, was just the beginning made something cold settle in my stomach. Tom leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low warning. "They're not done with you," he said. "They're just getting started." When I opened the envelope and saw $18,000 in behavioral penalties, I actually laughed, because it was the moment I knew Karen was losing control. No rational person jumps straight from fake violation notices to a debt the size of a used car unless they're desperate. And desperation makes dangerous people reckless. The letter didn't read like an HOA notice. It read like a threat dressed in administrative language. According to the paper, I had accumulated fines for non-compliance, obstruction, refusal to cooperate with inspections, and what she called aggressive resistance. There was a final line at the bottom, typed in bold. "Failure to remit payment may result in seizure of property under HOA authority." HOA authority. She loved those words. Loved saying them, printing them, weaponizing them. But this time, she pushed them further than ever before. I stepped outside to clear my head, but the moment I reached the sidewalk, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. Karen had posted laminated notices on the community bulletin board, large enough for every resident walking by to read. My name, in block letters, followed by accusations of hostility, repeated violations, aggressive behavior toward board members, and an ongoing investigation by her so-called enforcement unit. She didn't just want to fine me. She wanted to isolate me. I watched as a neighbor who usually waved at me glanced my way, hesitated, then pretended to check his phone and walked the long way around. Another woman, someone I had spoken with just a week earlier, pulled her child closer when she saw me. The polite smiles were gone, replaced by something quieter. Fear. Fear of Karen. Fear of being associated with me. Fear of becoming her next target. Karen's plan was working. Intimidation through social pressure. Public humiliation disguised as community protection. It wasn't new to me. Authoritarians use it all the time. But seeing it happen on a peaceful suburban street made it feel more personal than any operation I'd ever run in my federal years. I went back inside, spread the new letter across my table, and began compiling everything. Every violation, every forged signature, every printed threat, every video I had taken. I labeled folders, timestamps, and categorized evidence like I used to in case files. If she wanted a war, I wouldn't just defend myself. I'd make sure every step she took would be the rope she tied around her own neck. Later that evening, I walked over to speak with Tom. He opened the door before I even knocked twice. "She's escalating," I said, handing him the new letter. He scanned it, his jaw tightening. "Property seizure? She can't do that. An HOA doesn't have the authority to confiscate anything without going through the courts, and even then it's a stretch. She's betting the neighbors won't know that," I replied. Tom looked at me with a mix of concern and certainty. "You need to be ready. This kind of behavior doesn't plateau. It climbs until something breaks. And she's not trying to scare you anymore. She's trying to intimidate everyone else through you." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm documenting everything." He nodded slowly. "Good, because this isn't the end. The way she's moving, she's building up to something." And Tom was right. The next morning, I found a bright orange notice stuck to my front door. Mandatory property seizure inspection. 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in enforcement action. Karen wasn't done. She was escalating to her most dangerous play yet. I could feel it in the air that morning. The kind of thick tension that usually precedes a raid, not an HOA inspection. The sky was overcast, low clouds hanging like a warning. The neighborhood, normally buzzing with sprinklers and morning routines, felt quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. It was the kind of silence people create when they know something is about to happen and want no part of it. I stepped out onto my porch at 8:58 a.m., 2 minutes before Karen's so-called mandatory property seizure inspection. I wasn't planning on letting it happen, but I wasn't going to run from it either. My phone was in my pocket, evidence ready, documents prepared. I'd faced worse than this, but never in a place that was supposed to be home. At exactly 9 a.m., Karen turned the corner onto my street, walking with practiced importance. Behind her marched the same two fake officers dressed in those ridiculous uniforms, each of them wearing the expression of a man who had been promised authority he hadn't earned. As they approached my driveway, I saw movement in windows across the street, neighbors peeking out, watching, retreating. Fear spread through the neighborhood like a shadow. Karen stopped 3 feet from me, folding her hands neatly. "Mark," she said with a falsely sweet tone, "your refusal to comply has forced us to take corrective action." "Corrective action?" I echoed. "Is that what you're calling illegal enforcement now?" One of the officers stepped closer, blocking the walkway beside my fence. The other moved to flank my truck, cutting off the driveway exit. Their formation wasn't random. They'd been coached, or at least told what to do. "You were instructed to allow a full inspection of your property," Karen continued, ignoring my question. "Your continued obstruction and aggressive behavior leave us with no choice." "You mean refusing illegal searches?" I said. "Documented, recorded illegal searches, I might add." Her smile didn't falter. "Aggression," she repeated, as if saying it enough times would make it true. "Hostility, non-compliance, all actionable. And your fabricated fines? Your fake bylaws? Your forged signatures?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Are those actionable too?" For the first time a flicker crossed her eyes. Annoyance, fear, something, but she buried it fast. "Begin the assessment," she ordered her officers. The taller one took a step toward me. I moved slightly, enough to block his path to my yard. "You're not entering my property," I said. "Not without a real court order. Not without actual authority." Karen's composure cracked. "Your hostility has been documented multiple times, Mark," she said, raising her voice so the neighbors listening behind curtains could hear. "You are escalating this situation." "No," I said quietly. "You are." She snapped her fingers, an ugly gesture from someone who believed people should move when she commanded. "Detain him." For a heartbeat, everything froze. The officers exchanged a brief look, uncertain, nervous, but then stepped forward like they were trying to convince themselves they belonged in this role. "Don't do this," I warned, my voice steady but low. "You're crossing a line you can't uncross." The taller officer grabbed my right arm. The shorter one reached for my left. Their grips tightened, trying to mimic authority, trying to play the part. And as they seized me, I realized this was the exact moment Karen had been working toward. The moment she believed she had finally won. But she had no idea what was coming next. Their grip tightened on my arms, right up until the moment they saw the badge in my hand and everything inside them collapsed. It happened in a split second, but I felt it as clearly as the pressure of their fingers digging into my sleeves. One instant, they were trying to haul me toward my own truck like they were delivering a criminal. The next, their bodies went rigid, eyes widening, adrenaline evaporating into fear. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I simply held the badge out where both officers and Karen could see it clearly. The gold caught the morning light, reflecting a sharp glint across their faces. Recognition swept over them like a shockwave. Federal Protective Service. My real authority, not the pretend kind Karen had been manufacturing. The taller officer's jaw dropped, but he didn't let go right away. His fingers slackened as if his brain was trying to argue with what his eyes were seeing. The shorter one stumbled back a step, letting his hand fall uselessly to his side. His breathing changed, fast, shallow, panicked. Karen, however, was the one who reacted most dramatically. Her voice, normally polished and steady, cracked as she stuttered. What is that supposed to mean? This community's enforcement unit has jurisdiction." "No," I said, turning my gaze directly on her. "They don't. They never did." She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. Her face drained of color. She looked at her officers as if expecting them to deny what they were seeing, to restore her reality, to keep the illusion alive. But they couldn't. They knew better than anyone what impersonating a federal authority meant. I stepped forward just enough to reclaim my space. "Release me," I ordered, my tone flat, controlled, unmistakably official. The taller officer instantly let go. The shorter one raised his hands as if surrendering. Neither made eye contact. Good, I said. Now step back. They obeyed without question. Karen's mouth trembled. You can't talk to my officers that way. They aren't officers, I replied. They've been impersonating law enforcement, a federal felony, punishable by prison time. And every order you gave them puts you directly in that chain of liability. Her breath caught. She wasn't used to being spoken to like this. She wasn't used to consequences. For the first time since I met her, she looked small. Not powerful. Not untouchable. Just a person who had pushed too far and suddenly realized she'd stepped over a cliff. You have no idea what you've done, I continued. Fake badges, fake authority, illegal detainment, forced inspections, forged documents. That's a list long enough to get federal attention without me saying a word. The shorter officer swallowed hard. We didn't know. She told us. Quiet, Karen snapped, her voice cracking like a frayed rope about to snap. But it was too late. She had lost control, not just of them, but of everything. And then cutting through the tension like a blade came the distant wail of sirens. Real ones. Growing louder. Approaching fast. Karen turned toward the sound, her expression folding into panic. I simply stepped back, badge still visible. Because now the real authorities were on their way. I've seen people break under pressure before, but nothing prepared me for the way Karen crumbled when the deputies turned to question her. One moment she was barking orders, insisting her officers detain me. The next, she was standing frozen in my driveway as two marked sheriff's units pulled up, lights flashing silently, painting her face in red and blue. The first deputy stepped out with the calm authority of someone who didn't need to pretend. His hand rested near his holster, not gripping it, just there out of habit. His partner scanned the scene quickly. Two men in fake uniforms, a shaken but composed homeowner, and an HOA president trying to decide whether to act outraged or innocent. What's going on here? The first deputy asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I simply held up my badge again, letting him see it. His eyes met mine. An understanding passed between us without a word. Then he turned to look at the two fake officers. Badges, he said. They hesitated a split second too long. When they finally held them out, the deputy didn't even bother to take them. He just glanced at the cheap plastic and shook his head. These aren't real, he said flatly. Karen lurched forward. Officer, this is a misunderstanding. These men are part of our authorized compliance enforcement unit. We have full jurisdiction too. You have jurisdiction over lawn heights and paint colors. The deputy cut in. Not people. Not detainment. Not searches. And definitely not uniforms that look like law enforcement. Her mouth opened and closed like she was choking on air. The deputies separated them quickly. One took the two fake officers aside, asking how they were hired, who paid them, what they were told. The other focused on Karen. I watched the confidence drain from her posture with each question. Who created this enforcement unit? Who designed these badges? Did you inform residents they were actual law enforcement? Did you authorize entering properties without consent? Her answers shifted, twisted, contradicted themselves. First she insisted it was board approved. Then she claimed she had verbal authorization. Then she said the men misunderstood their roles. When that didn't land, she tried a new angle. Tears. I was just trying to protect the community, she said, her voice shaking, eyes glistening just enough to appear fragile. People weren't following the rules. Someone had to maintain order. Behind her, neighbors had started to gather at a distance. People who once hid behind blinds now stepped cautiously onto their porches. Whispers spread through the air. She forged our notices. She threatened to fine us too. She scared the Sanders into moving. The deputy heard them. He turned back to Karen. Ma'am, we have witnesses saying you used fake officers, fake documents, and threats of liens to intimidate residents. That's not maintaining order. That's harassment. Maybe fraud. Maybe more. I handed over the folder I'd prepared. Printed emails, copies of every notice, photos of the forged signatures, screenshots of the uniforms sold online, the unregistered badge numbers. The deputy flipped through it, his expression tightening. "This is substantial," he said quietly. "Impersonation, coercion, possible extortion if money changed hands." Karen's composure finally shattered. "This is all being blown out of proportion," she snapped. Then more desperately, "They knew. The board knew. I wasn't the only one." But the board members who had once sat beside her in obedient silence weren't there now. No one stepped forward to defend her. The community that had feared her was finally watching her fall. The deputies cuffed the two fake officers first. Karen watched in disbelief as they were led toward the patrol car. Then one of the deputies turned to me. "Mark, we're going to need you to stick around," he said. "Federal investigators are going to want a private word with you about this." And just like that, I realized Karen's little kingdom had drawn attention from far beyond our neighborhood. For the first time since moving in, I felt the weight lift from my chest. But peace never lasts long in neighborhoods controlled by power-hungry people. Even as the deputies drove Karen and her fake officers away, even as neighbors stepped out of their homes with relief written across their faces, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the end of her chapter. Within days, the county and state oversight committees opened formal reviews into Willow Creek Estates. What started as a local disturbance had unraveled into a public example of HOA abuse. State officials stepped in to put the entire association under temporary supervision, while investigators dug into Karen's actions, the board's silence, and every questionable policy implemented. Under her leadership, for the first time, the community wasn't afraid to speak. Residents who once avoided eye contact now gathered on sidewalks, sharing stories of intimidation, forged notices, and threats they'd been too scared to mention. People who had suffered quietly under Karen's rule finally understood they weren't alone. Their voices mattered, and they wanted change. A special election was called to replace the HOA board. This time, ballots weren't collected door to door by Karen's chosen volunteers, but submitted anonymously through a secure third-party agency. When the results came in, the board looked entirely different. Normal, everyday residents who actually wanted to help the neighborhood instead of control it. No enforcers, no intimidation tactics, just people who believed in common sense. They asked me to assist them as an advisor while the community rewrote the bylaws from the ground up. I wasn't looking for a leadership role, but after everything I'd seen, I couldn't walk away from helping them rebuild trust. Together, we created clear boundaries, transparent rules, and protections against any future abuse of power. We formed committees open to all residents, and every decision now required full community input. No more secret votes, no more forged signatures, no more fear. As weeks passed, the neighborhood slowly regained its life. Children played in driveways again. People walked their dogs without glancing over their shoulders. Conversations replaced whispers. For the first time, Willow Creek actually felt like the peaceful community it had pretended to be. Still, I couldn't ignore the lesson buried beneath everything that happened. Corruption doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears a smile, a blazer, and the title of president. Sometimes it hides behind clipboards and paperwork. Sometimes it convinces an entire neighborhood to stay quiet out of fear. That's why I'm sharing this story now. Because someone watching this might be going through something similar. Maybe not with fake officers or forged documents, but with an HOA, a landlord, a supervisor, or anyone who believes authority gives them the right to bully, intimidate, or manipulate. If that's you, don't stay silent. Document everything. Learn your rights. Get help when you need it. And remember, power only works when people are too scared to challenge it. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever dealt with an HOA or authority figure who abused their power? What did you do? What do you wish you had done? Your stories might help someone else find the courage to push back. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought Karen's arrest and the restructuring of the HOA would finally bring the peace I'd been chasing since the day I moved in. And for a while, it did. Life stabilized. The fear faded. I could breathe. But peace is never permanent. Just last week, Tom came to my door with a look I recognized instantly. The look of someone who's seen trouble forming on the horizon. He handed me a printed news article. The headline made my stomach tighten. Nearby HOA launches. Security Division. With unverified officers. Residents fear abusive enforcement. Tom just looked at me and said, "Sound familiar?" So maybe this story isn't over after all. It might just be shifting to the next neighborhood.